in 2018, the summer, I got an email from Solana California, and it said, was that the church that had the person who's very well known in small groups in the 90s as a pastor there? Yeah, that was the church. Wow, Solana Beach, why are you contacting us? And then I got to talk to Mike and become a great friend over the years. And we have coached Solana Beach Presbyterian Church 3 times through the Reveal survey, the assessment. The first time was a score that no church wants to hear about. And I had the joy of about this many people, leaders in the church, in a room and having to share the news that you're troubled. You're troubled is what it said. But it's amazing. We call them our hero church because in 5 years, they went from being troubled to being energized on the same discipleship assessment. We've never seen a church move that fast, change a culture that much. Last spring, after 22 years, Mike retired. He's now the executive director of the fellowship gathering. I'm sure he'll tell us more about that. But Mike is inspiring. You know, he was a great leader. We get to work with a lot of churches with a lot of leaders, and he is the top of the barrel or the top of whatever. Mike, welcome.
All right. So am I on? Am I good? Hi, everybody. So I retired. I'm retired. 6 months retired, and everybody's like, so there's a transition in that. Yeah, there is. So how's it going? Well, we're in transition, and so we're trying to figure it out. But one of the things I like to say about retirement was my wife Amy and I decided, at least I decided, God, we have a lot of microphones. When you go through life with labels, with titles, identity is important to all of us, right? Identity is really important. And so for 35 years of ordained ministry, I've been Pastor Mike. And we were coming to a season where I wanted to be not Pastor Mike, but Papa Mike. And to be known primarily as a grandfather to my 7 grandchildren, 4 boys in the LA area, and 3 girls in Michigan. And after 22 years, Amy and I made a decision to retire, move back to a home, to Glendale in the LA area, where we could create a new season of life for us. And my part-time role as the executive director of the fellowship community gives me an opportunity to stay connected with pastors within the Presbyterian denomination and work toward the renewal of our churches and connecting pastors to one another so that we can remain faithful to our calling to Christ-centered ministries, which is a great soft landing for me to do what I already love doing that helps me use my gifts to build up the church and encourage others. So anyway, it's great to be here tonight. And it's great to be here to celebrate 20 years with Ascending Leaders for 2 reasons. One is I think that celebration is a really important spiritual practice for us in community. For us to take the time to look back and to remember God's faithfulness and God's goodness, especially through individuals and through an organization that has tried so hard to seek after God's heart and to be faithful to a calling to restore the church and renew disciples, to remember God's faithfulness, the seeds planted, those that watered it, the fruit that came of it, the pruning, all of those things. And now the board is looking forward to a new season of what God is doing. So it's great to be a part of a celebration. And already tonight we've heard so many great stories and such inspiration about what it means to be a disciple. But really, I'm happy to be here tonight because of the role that Ascending Leaders has had in my life and the life of Solana Beach Presbyterian Church since 2018, as Mike has said. I'm grateful for Mike's leadership and the consultation that he was able to give me and to our church toward the spiritual vitality of our church in transformative ways. Amy and I have been walking the Caminos in Spain since 2018. As a matter of fact, I wasn't the one who contacted Mike. It was a group of people in our church while I was gone. When you're gone on sabbatical and people are calling consultants to do work at your church? So I come back from sabbatical, and they said, look, listen, we talked with this guy, Mike Johnson, from Ascending Leaders, and we think we ought to do the Reveal study. So Amy and I were on sabbatical on the Camino in 2018, and each year since, it's been an important yearly rhythm for me and for Amy to get away on our study leave, to take 2 weeks of study leave, to take our stipend, and 2 weeks and walk 10 days of a portion of the Camino in Spain. And if you're not familiar with it, you take everything you want to carry, put it in a backpack, about 11 or 12 pounds. You walk 13 miles a day to the next hostel where you're going to spend the night on a very, very luxurious bunk bed with disposable sheets. After you've showered and you've washed your clothes and you found something to eat, you get a good night's sleep and you get up and you walk 13 miles again. And one time, Amy and I this is on the first time we walked in 2018. We had watched the movie The Way, if any of you have seen The Way. The Way has increased the participation on the Caminos substantially since it came out, I think, in 2010 or so. And there was a famous hostel that they featured in the movie where they sleep on mats on the floor, not even bunk beds, just sort of a gymnasium mat on the floor. And they had a wonderful group meal, and we thought this is worth sleeping on the floor on mats to have this great group meal and communal experience, so we did it. And as we're leaving the next morning, Amy said, that was great. I said, yeah, that was great. She said, but if we could find a place with beds tonight, that would be great. And so the next place we went to, there was 2 options, one that had beds and one that did not have beds. I said, Amy, we'll find the place that has beds. And I go, and there was a sign on the door, closed for the season. And we walked back to the other place that had mats on the floor, and we knocked on the door, and Santiago answered the door, and he says, we don't have beds, we have mats. And I looked at Amy, and she said, I don't know. He says, look, if you don't want to stay here, that's fine. You can walk 2 more miles down the road. And we say, we'll stay. We'll stay right here. So he walked us upstairs, and by that time, we were about 6 days into the Camino, and I started to get blisters. Everybody says, do you get blisters on the Camino? I said, of course you do. It's not a matter of if you get them, it's when you get them and how you manage your pain through them. But nobody had shown me yet what to do with my blisters, and there's great controversy, by the way, of what you do with a blister. Do you lance it? Do you leave it alone? Right? Big controversy in Camino land. So Santiago takes us up to our room. We put our things down on the mats on the floor, come downstairs. He says, I've noticed that this is all in Spanish, I noticed that you're limping. What's wrong? I said, well, I've got blisters. He says, let me take a look. He brings out a bowl of salt water, cold salt water. I dip my feet in the salt water, and he brings out his cookie tin of needles. And now I'm nervous that someone is going to do something controversial with my feet and my blisters. And so he says, okay, so I soaked them. He comes back and he says, okay, now here, take the needle. I want you to lance the blister. So I lanced the blister, and it's really exciting, all the psst, like a whole waterworks thing going on. It's great. And he says, now you need, we soak my feet again in salt water, and he says, now you got to keep your feet clean. If you don't lance your blister, you're going to limp. And if you limp, you're going to hurt something else. I'm like, wow, wisdom, that's pretty good. So he says, now look, dinner is at 6 o'clock, but we're going to meet to fix dinner at 4 o'clock, and then at 5 o'clock we'll have coffee and cookies or whatever. I'm like, okay, great. So we came back and we all fixed dinner together, and we had a kind of little coffee hour with people, and then he says, Mike, would you translate for me to everybody? I have a few things I want to say to the table. And I've never translated from Spanish into English before. And he wanted everybody to know that this Camino was a Camino of love, and that this Camino was a place where people are connected to one another. And if you want to come to the prayer service tonight up in the attic, you're welcome to come. You don't have to come, but if you choose not to come, would you please stay back and do the dishes? And so everybody surprisingly came to the prayer service, and Santiago organized it so that every person in their own language, in Japanese and in German, in French and English, were all reading the liturgy in their own language. Remarkable. And then he handed to us cards that had prayers on them that were written by people who were 2 weeks ahead of us on the Camino. And as we're reading them, we're reading other people's stories of their journey on the Camino. And the woman next to me begins to sob. I go, what's wrong? And she goes, this is just like my story. So we all go to bed. We sleep on the mats. The next morning we have breakfast and we leave, and Amy and I are sort of debriefing the experience. And we're like, so, amazing dinner. He fixed my blisters. What a prayer service. Was it worth sleeping on the floor? Yeah, totally. And by the way, who was Santiago? Who was he? Was he a medic? Was he a pastor? Was he a chef? Yes, all of those things. Robert Mulholland says that discipleship is a lifelong journey of becoming like Jesus for the sake of others. And when we begin to see our Christian life as a journey, we recognize that this is taking one faithful step after another. And along the way, you have people who come into your journey who are the people that you need at the time you need them to provide whatever support you need, whether it's encouragement or directions or lancing a blister. That is a way that I've come to understand the Christian life, and partly the role that ascending leaders played in our lives at Solana Beach Presbyterian Church. Let me give you just a little background of my time at Solana Beach. I came in 2003 as the senior pastor, and there was a history in the church of infidelity and a lack of trust and abuse of power before I came. It was 9 years since that pastor had left, and it was after he left that it was discovered all that he had done. And it was the last 3 years before I came that there were town hall meetings and consultants talking about abuse of power and building trust again. So the idea of consultants was not a real positive thing for our church. When I came, everybody was ready to get back to work. There was some pent-up energy around some projects that were put on hold, and a few of them stand out. The first was the very first board meeting that I ever moderated was one where we were deciding on a 10-year, $2 million partnership in Ethiopia with the McClenahan Jesus Church and World Vision. It included water wells and sustainable farming for traditional nomadic herdsmen, building health clinics and schools, and developing micro-enterprise groups for women. And after 15 years of that partnership, we began to see the first convert in a majority Muslim region, and a whole new phase of that partnership began to develop in an area that National Geographic said is the worst place to live on the planet. It was very exciting, and I learned the long journey of building trusting relationships that pointed to Jesus. Another project that was a pent-up project that we began was an overhaul of our discipleship model that transitioned from classes and sort of an institute model of 6-week courses that people rotated through, listening to lectures, to a sermon-based small group model. And within a year of my arrival, we launched 50 new small groups with 500 participants that remained consistent through 20 years. A third project was the building campaigns of our campus, one that modernized the sanctuary. And I don't know if you find this to be controversial at all in your church, but to install screens in our sanctuary. Anybody? And the other was to overhaul our 7-acre campus for $13 million that created a whole new spaces for gathering and state-of-the-art buildings for our children and nursery and preschool. Another was enhancing our Hispanic ministry that had started in 1985 by reaching out to migrant workers in North County, San Diego, became a new worshiping community at our church in 1990. It had grown over the years, and it was a part of our church. It wasn't a nested congregation. It was our people. If they joined the church, they were members of our church. And a nonprofit to tutor kids had been started in 1997, and by the mid-2000s, there were 200 children being tutored by volunteers from all over the community, not just our church. And when immigration became a national issue again in 2013 and 14, we decided to jump into the issue to be good neighbors to our Hispanic friends, and we started an immigration center to help them with Department of Justice trained legal counselors to help 4,000 people identify what their possibility of residency was, and 250 now, I think, have become legal citizens or residents. I don't know about you, that caused a little bit of controversy in our church. We also decided to change our worship services. Based on declining numbers of our traditional service and young families not coming to our traditional service, we created a whole new model of having the same style of worship in both of our services. Not a blended service, but a contemporary service where the choir sang skillfully and beautifully to support the worship music and to sing an anthem. So all of this was happening, and we kept trying to measure our success as a church. And each one of these projects, I mention each of these because each of these projects were intended for growth. Each of these projects was intended to reach more people, to reach young adults, to reach students, to reach families. And yet our numbers continued to decline. And year after year, the session would ask, well, so are we being successful? And frankly, I was tired of trying to measure our success by membership numbers and worship numbers and participation or dollars given. So that's why they called Mike. That we need to measure our success in a different way and actually figure out what it means to be faithful in our ministry. So as Mike shared, we took the Reveal survey in 2019 for the first time. And Mike prepared our session and staff for the survey. We got great participation, and we received the results. And as Mike shared, we had a Saturday morning to share the results with 100 leaders, elders, deacons, small group leaders, staff. And I already knew what the results were. And I was shocked and disappointed and discouraged by being labeled a troubled church. There was a low-grade disappointment and anger toward leadership, toward me, because of the changes that we had made over the years. And it didn't seem fair because all of those decisions were made by leadership of the church. We were doing what we felt called to do. And as Mike was sharing the numbers of our survey, I was sitting next to my wife, Amy, and I was gripping the table as he's sharing the results. And I'm honestly thinking to myself, is it time for them to find a new pastor? Have I failed? I'm gripping the table, and Amy writes me a note, passes it to me, and she says, Mike, just breathe. So Mike was done sharing with everybody the results, and then he asked me to come up and share some inspiration. And I had to be honest with everyone. We had spent the last decade doing so much. And what the survey told us was that we had actually exchanged intimacy with God for activity for God. And this is true for so many of our churches, where we're doing the right things, but we've forgotten our first love. And so as I was talking with Mike and Callie, the other consultant from Reveal, we were talking about what's the best practices for churches like us that have lost their first love, that have exchanged intimacy with God for activity for God. What's the best practice? And this is what, I don't know how many thousands of dollars we spent for this consultation. It was actually just sort of a junior high exercise. We're going to do a quiet time. That's it? We're going to spend time alone with God. That's it? Yep. So we started a campaign of spending 15 minutes alone in your favorite chair. This is 2019. And we had a whole campaign for 90 days, and we gave everyone bookmarks. Seriously, this is junior high ministry all over again. Gave everybody bookmarks with scripture readings for each day and gave everybody a little structure for what that time would look like. And what do we do during that time? We practice our own time alone with God, with spiritual disciplines, solitude, reflection on scripture, prayers of confession, guidance, thanksgiving, whatever. Just time alone to listen to God. It isn't Bible study. It isn't preparation for anything else. And so what I said to the group of leaders there was, I need this, I think, as much as you all need this. Would you join me on this journey of growing in our intimacy with God together? Would you model with me what it's like to spend time alone with God in a way that we're growing in our intimacy with him? Would you join me in being a Christ-centered leader that's disarmingly humble, that models a surrendered heart, that grows in intimacy with God and encourages others to do the same? Would you do that? We actually had people sign a form, a commitment. Everybody was all in. You could tell, when Peter preaches at Pentecost and they were cut to the heart, and he said, what must we do? Repent and be baptized. It was that kind of sense that we had this deep conviction that we need to do something different. And so we began this campaign of 15 minutes alone with God in our favorite chair. That was 2019. And I don't know if you guys remember what happened just a year later. During COVID, our congregation had the tools they needed to be alone with God in their favorite chair. As we began to regather, I began to hear stories of people's transformation. Shirley, who had been one of those members in the church for over 35 years, maybe 80-ish, came to me as we were regathering, hadn't seen each other for a long time, and she says, Mike, I just want to thank you for your encouragement to spend 15 minutes alone with God in our favorite chair, but I have to confess something to you. I said, what? Shirley, what? She says, and she starts to tear up. She says, it's never 15 minutes. It goes to 30 minutes and 45 minutes, and I just have to tell you, I've never experienced this kind of intimacy with God ever in my life. And then Rhonda came up, and Rhonda is a homeless woman in our church. She passed away a couple years ago, but she was absolutely angry with me after I had encouraged people to spend 15 minutes in their favorite chair. And she said, Mike, do you know that those of us who are homeless don't have favorite chairs? But I want you to know, every morning when I wake up, I'm in my sleeping bag under my tent. I'm spending 15 minutes alone with God. We began to hear the stories as we began to regather, and there sensed to be a new joy, a new enthusiasm. So in 2021, since this was how we were measuring our success as a church, I wanted to take the survey again. And in 2021, we took the survey. And during that time, our session reframed our identity statements to say that our global end was that we are growing disciples in their love for God and others. We made discipleship our global end. This is what we want to be. This is our reason for being. Discipleship was the whole thing. Mission is about discipleship. Worship is about discipleship. We're here to form disciples. It's not just a department. And so we would use those results again in 2021 to develop our ministry plans. And the results were we moved from troubled up to the top. And you have to look at the measurements, but the vertical measurement is people's personal growth based on their personal spiritual practices, and the horizontal is the church's leadership in getting them there. And so they shot up to the top. And now two things I think are a reason for that. One is because people began spending time alone with God. Secondly, a lot of people left our church who saw that survey was not resulting in something that they wanted. So one way to grow the intimacy with God in your church and spiritual vitality is get rid of the complainers or people who are unwilling to grow. I'm saying that facetiously, but. So Mary Jo Cook called me, and Mary Jo Cook was 90 years old, and Mary Jo Cook wanted to make sure that she talked to me about this survey we just took, and she left a message in the church office for me to call her, and I'm like, Mary Jo Cook, I've never gotten a call from her. She was a founding member of our church, and virtually a founding member. And she says, Mike, you know that survey you had us take? And I'm thinking she's going to complain. She said, it didn't take me 20 minutes. It took me 2 hours to take that survey. I took it very seriously, but this is the second time I've taken it. And I want you to know I've grown in my faith. Just responding to the questions, I knew I grew. So we took it again in 2023. And this time we stayed up in people's personal spiritual practices, but moved to the right, which meant they began to trust the leadership was doing something to help them grow. Awesome. So 2023, we met again. Mike shared the news with the congregation. We talked with Callie as well, and she said, you have great spiritual capital with your congregation. I said, great, what's spiritual capital? She says, they trust you. They trust you, which to me was like the biggest win. It felt like it was a healing for me and for the congregation. And I said, well, what do you do with spiritual capital? She says, you spend it. What do you spend it on? She says, something that's at risk, like a new mission partnership or a building program. And I thought to myself, or my retirement. Because this will be a hard thing for me. It'll be a hard thing for our congregation after 22 years. So Amy and I had begun thinking and praying about our retirement before, and with grandchild 6 and 7 born in 2020, we knew that these next 10 years of our family would be really important for us. And we began to put things in order, and we took the risk of making the announcement of my retirement a year in advance and presenting with our session a co-pastor process to find a new pastor. And I had the great privilege of shepherding the congregation through that time of transition. And for me, we all have stories of faith in our family background, but for me, it was hard to put that difficult thing on the family table and stay there and talk about it. And we were able to do that because we had learned to trust God and to trust each other, to take the next faithful step, to be able to lead a congregation of people who were high-achieving people into a future that they really didn't know the outcome. The journey of discipleship for me was about leadership, about changing the culture of our church, but it was also very personal for me. During that season, I realized that my primary calling was not as a pastor, but it was as a disciple. And now retired from full-time ministry, that's really serving me well to think myself not even as Papa Mike, but as disciple Mike. And being a pastor is really important, but it's not nearly as important as being a disciple. And it's prepared Amy and I to take this step in our journey of life and faith. Scripture says, trust in the Lord with all of your heart, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your camino, your path. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe passage. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he'll give you the desires of your heart. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in the future. Tonight, I'm really grateful for Ascending Leaders and the influence that Mike and the team had on our church and my own life. And my prayer for Ascending Leaders in the next 20 years is that God would direct your path, bless your efforts, and equip you to walk alongside churches like ours on their journey of discipleship.